Sıradaki sunumumuz Akamai'den gelecek. Akamai, internet içeriği hızlandırma, erişim yönetimi konusunun büyük firmalarından bir tanesi. Malumunuz dünyadaki en büyüğü. Geçen yıl içerisinde Prolexi'yi, DDoS korumasını dünyadaki en büyük firmasını satın aldı. Sabahki panellerde de duymuşsunuzdur. Dizilerde DDoS var, ne yapacağız, aman Prolexi'yi arayın falan diye geçmeye bile başladı. O kadar popüler hale getirdiler teknolojiyi. Bugün bizde Richard Muse sunumu gerçekleştirecek Akamai'den. Richard, EMEA bölgesinde IT mimarlarının, güvenlik mimarlarının yöneticisi. Akamai'ye teşekkür ediyoruz. Bu kadar kıdemli bir teknik uzmanı bizimle vakit ayıracak şekilde programını değiştirip de buraya getirdikleri için. Uzatmadan sözü Richard'a devrediyorum. Akamai'nin hem DDoS tarafında hem erişim güvenliği tarafındaki ve uygulama güvenliği tarafındaki çözümlerini anlatmak üzere. Richard, thank you.
Thank you, Burak. Thank you very much for sticking with us today. I know it's a bit later on in the day than we planned, but hopefully I can make this next half an hour interesting for you. So this is going to be slightly different for the presentations you've seen already. Most of them have been vendor presentations, pitching about products and things that they can do for you. What we're going to talk about here is more about the threats that you're seeing out on the internet at the moment and how they can directly affect you. There will be a few nods to how Akamai can help you, but mainly it's going to be about generic internet threats. So first of all, you've probably all seen this triangle before. It's called the CIA triangle: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And all of these things can be affected by web and internet threats. So we're thinking about data breaches, session hijacking for confidentiality, site defacement, malware for integrity, and availability. Simple things like DDoS can take your sites down. So these things are part of the CIA triangle. Now, triangles are going to keep coming through in the rest of the presentation, and I think it's a very important aspect to try and make people remember the three basic tenets of what you need to try and protect and how we can protect them. So another triangle for us here, and the reason I want to talk about this one is when somebody thinks about their web assets and how they have presence on the internet, there are three things that you need to remember. You need to have infrastructure, you need to have DNS, and you need to have your web applications. And the attackers, wherever they may be, are after all three of those different entities. And there are as many different ways to take them down. Now, today you will have heard different stories from different vendors about how you can protect the DNS, how you can protect the infrastructure, and how you can protect the web application. Fortunately, with Akamai, we can protect all three. So it's a one-stop shop. But these are the three things. Do you take one of these things out, everything goes down. You heard InfoBlocks talking today about you take the DNS out, you have no web application. Doesn't matter how good your protection is on your web infrastructure or your basic data center infrastructure. If your DNS goes down, nobody's going to be able to talk to you. So you need to protect your DNS. You need to protect your web applications. You need to make sure they don't get hacked. You need to make sure that the databases behind them are not getting hacked. And you need to make sure the infrastructure is there. You need to make sure that the routers, the firewalls, the internet connections are all available and not being taken down. So first of all, let's start looking at the enemy. Who are the people who want to try and take us down? They could be anything from hacktivists. They could be, we used to call them script kiddies back in the 2000s. People who wanted to play, see what they could do. What damage could they do just by playing in their own back room? Extortionists. This is a big one we'll come on to in a couple of slides' time. Competitors, state-sponsored. I know there's a few things with Ukraine and Russia where they had a few bit of DDoS attacks. And there's been lots of other things in the Middle East and around here as well, where nation-states will take cyber warfare to other nations. So here's an example of a company, an organization called Armine. These were put on by using the FIFA team program to try and say, we'll give you free licenses or we'll give you free upgrades on FIFA if you go to this Twitter link. And the idea was that they were trying to do crowdsourcing to try and get people involved, to try and do DDoS attacks. And they were getting up to about 120 gigabits per second in terms of their DDoS attacks. And they were a bit disorganized, but it just shows how the same plan that was done with the attacks from 3 or 4 years ago, which were all sort of crowdsourced, trying to get people to opt in to do DDoS attacks to take people down. These things are still happening. People are still interested in it. If you can get enough people interested in it, they will all voluntarily take part in the DDoS attack. This one is the current one that's in terms of extortion. Has anybody here heard of DD4BC? Nobody's heard of DD4BC. Okay, this is called DDoS for Bitcoin. This has been very prevalent in the US, in Western Europe, in Australia, and Japan, and Singapore, and various other regions of APJ. DD4BC are an organization based on extortion. That's all they do. They will basically hit your website for an hour, then they'll send you an email saying, if you want that to happen or not to happen again, pay us in Bitcoins. And you'll get an email to say that. And that's all it is. It's a very simple message. And they're quite clever. They don't charge you lots and lots and lots of Bitcoins. They're not trying to get you to pay $1 million because they realize that that's going to raise all sort of compliance flags within the bank or the credit card company or the payment processing company. What they do is they charge, maybe say, $15,000 because that fits under the radar. That's not going to raise any alarm bells. And they send these out to thousands of people. They're DDoSing people day in, day out, sending the ransom letter, waiting for people to pay. And this is what you're liable to see. You're liable to get an email like this. Here we are. Hello, your site is extremely vulnerable to DDoS attacks. This time, this was when it first started out. They were only charging 1 Bitcoin. The price is now about 400 Bitcoins. So this is a very, very common extortion attempt. So what you need to be able to do is think, well, how can I protect myself? Why are these people trying to extort me? You want to be able to put yourself in a position where it doesn't matter if they send you this email. You're going to be wanting a position where you can resist these attacks. They claim 400 gigabits per second. We've been defeating these attacks on behalf of our customers for the best part of 9 months to a year, and we haven't seen anything go above 100 gigabits per second. So they are a little bit generous in their numbers. But the point is, 100 gigabits per second is still going to take down any organization in Europe, for at least. So let's think about, we looked at the attackers, now look at the actual part of the network they're trying to attack. And this is rather a crude slide, so apologies for the play school art in here. But essentially, this is quite an easy way of trying to figure out where all the bits of the attack happen, because you hear people talk about layer 3, layer 4, layer 7 attacks. But what does that actually mean? So when we talk about layer 3 attacks, these are sort of the volumetric floods. And this is what we measure in megabits per second, gigabits per second, terabits per second. And this is designed just to flood the pipe, flood your connection to the internet. And then we have the layer 4. So this is like your SYN floods, things like that, where it's designed to be a resource exhaustion on your load balancers, your firewalls, and your routers. And then we have the layer 7 floods. This is when we're talking a little bit more further up the stack. We're looking in requests per second. Ideally, what they're trying to do is to try and put lots and lots of load onto your web server to try and make it perform very, very slowly. So there are different types of layers of attacks and different types of attacks for each one. So if you are looking at a solution for DDoS, and you are looking at a solution for application firewalls, you need to look at something that's going to be able to address the right levels. If somebody's going to launch a SYN flood at you, there's no point in having a simple WAF that's not going to be able to protect you. If you're going to have something to protect your web applications, you need to make sure that somebody can't just knock the pipe out. So make sure you have protection for layer 3, layer 4, and layer 7. So some people may be around in the dim, dark, distant past of DDoS, which was maybe about 2011. Sounds like a long time ago, but DDoS really only became prevalent in the sort of the beginning of this decade. And the way to do a DDoS attack was to compromise a PC, to go out and get a virus, bit of malware onto a PC. You did that to 10,000, 20,000 PCs, you then had a botnet. Once you had that botnet, you were then able to use it and control it to launch it and target it against specific websites or specific applications. And this worked very well. It could generate about a 40 gigabit per second attack. The only problem was that it was very slow to ramp up. It was very unwieldy. It was difficult to manipulate. People put antivirus scanners on their PCs and cleaned their PCs up. So you had this huge mass of PCs that you had to try and control. Very difficult to manage, very difficult to control. So when we had the second generation of DDoS, which is in 2012, which we call Brobot, it was part of an attack wave called It's Okay, No Problem, Bro, which was done mainly against the banks in the US, but the DDoS toolkit was utilized in many different campaigns. This was a different mindset. They went away from trying to put viruses on your granny's PC, where you had an old Windows PC stuck on a dial-up connection at home, to trying to put it onto web servers. Commonly things like a WordPress server, because the third-party exploits in WordPress servers are fairly easy to hack. What this meant, you were now on permanently connected, high-bandwidth SDSL connections. What they were doing is they were finding these machines that they could compromise, dropping PHP scripts onto them. They then had a very powerful weapon that was worth maybe 10 or 100 of the old nodes. This meant we could now generate attacks up to 200 gigabits per second with only 1,000 to 2,000 nodes. And this could ramp up in minutes. So that was the second generation. Then we had the third generation. And the third generation is using the internet against itself. And this is where the volumes of the attacks really start to go off the scale. Because this is when we're starting to see a lot more of the UDP attacks, and the sheer scale goes up. So if we look at what's happened over the last few years, this is 2010 through to 2015, Q2. We do a report every quarter that shows all the DDoS attacks we see in the world, and we're seeing about sort of I don't know, what is it, 50 to 60 attacks per day at the moment, and we monitor and track all these individual attacks, and this is how we see the attack size is growing. So this is the number of attacks per year, so you can see how much it's growing at the moment, and this is the maximum attack size in gigabits per second, and this is the maximum in millions of packets per second. Packets per second is a slightly different effect on things. We call it the silent killer. But the bits per second, you can see how that has exponentially grown from 68 to 82 to 110 to 190 to 320. It's tapered off a bit this year, but the size has been going up exponentially. So we're expecting to see 400, 500 gigabits per second attack. Now, from your perspective, does it really matter if its attack is 10 gig or 100 gig or a terabit per second? If you only have a 1 gig connection, you're going down anyway. But you need to be able to understand is that the attackers have got a really big hammer, and they can make a lot of damage. And not only is it going to start affecting you, but it'll start affecting your ISPs as well. And it'll start affecting everybody else who's associated with your bandwidth and your connections. So does anybody know what is the primary cause of these big increases in attack traffic? The clue is on the next slide. And it's not the fact that it's a mosque, it's the fact that it's a reflection. It's the best reflection I could find for Istanbul. Reflection attacks. That's the big thing that's happened. It's using the internet against itself. And if we look at the attack vectors we saw in Q2, SYN flood, this has been the most common attack vector for many, many years. But SSDP, NTP, DNS, ChargeN, these are all UDP reflection attacks. These are all using the internet against itself. NTP exists on the internet, everybody uses it. DNS exists on the internet, everybody uses it. Similarly, SSDP is on everybody's home router. DNS, chargen, all these things are parts of that has been left open on the internet. People can use them and create huge, huge DDoS attacks. To give you an example, the reason why it's so good, so I'll go through a couple of examples. So this is the latest one that's come out, which is called RIP1. RIP is a really old routing protocol. Don't bother reading all the stuff. I think it's, RIP1 is an old routing protocol. You could basically just query a routing server, and it gives you back lots and lots of information. It's done over UDP, so you spoof the source. It doesn't matter. And RIP hasn't been used for years. Another example is SSDP. Who at home has got a DSL router, a broadband router at home? If everybody doesn't put their hand up, I know you're lying. Chances are it's running SSDP. If you go and dig around in the web browser you have with your home router, chances are there's going to be a button that says UPnP or SSDP. This is how lots and lots and lots, in fact, basically 1 in 5 DDoS attacks last quarter was done using SSDP. It's basically when you plug everything into your home router, how your TiVo box can talk to everything and it understands everything, how it all fits together, using universal plug and play. What happens is you use a UDP query, you hit the SSD, you hit the box on a certain port, and it responds back with a whole load of information about your particular appliance. Every single DSL router runs SSDP. Some are patched, some aren't. But how long is your ISP going to patch your router? When is that going to happen? So there's going to be millions and millions and millions of these boxes that are going to be basically acting as DDoS attackers. And they can be called on. Very easy to do a script to find out how many there are on the internet. Very easy to do that, and then you can just use that as a reflection. This one, we did a survey was done recently. This is for Korea. Korea did a recent broadband rollout of a whole load of new nodes. You can see that they're providing the majority of the open SSDP servers. But also you have United States, Argentina, I mean lots of different countries. And the more and more the routers go out, the more and more that this vector will increase. Another one is chargen. Anybody of a certain age will probably remember using chargen back in probably the late 1990s to test networks. You used to hit a port on a Windows server or something like that, and it would spew out a whole load of ASCII text like this. It's great, but you can send it anywhere. All I need to know is your source IP. And I put that in as a query, and it'll send all that stuff to you. And it'll block your network. It'll block your internet pipes. It'll block your routers. It'll block your firewalls. Doesn't matter. Nice and easy. NTP is another example. I won't bother going into that one. It's the same sort of thing. It's utilizing the fact that it's UDP and you can spoof the source. And this gives you an idea of what we're talking about, the reflection, but you can also amplify it. The RIP one we talked about at the beginning, amplification factor of 131 times. You generate 1 gig of traffic, it generates 131 gig of traffic. SSDP, 30 multiplication factor. Generate 1 gig, it generates 30 gigs. The fact that there are so many of them around makes it easier to generate that volume. Chargen, 358 times. So you can see with this a small amount of nodes spoofing these IP addresses, it creates these huge volumes of attacks. And the point is, all these source IPs, all these IP addresses, the attacks are coming from, they're legitimate DNS servers. They're legitimate IPs. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not infected. There's no virus on these PCs. They're not doing anything malicious. They are legitimate DNS, NTP, SSTP route. So you can't go and blacklist them because you'd be blacklisting half the planet. So it's a very interesting concept about how to make sure, how you're going to actually mitigate these attacks. How are you going to identify what's actually coming through? There we go. So this is just a quick review of an attack that was done earlier on this year. And what I want to try and point out in this part is it's not just the fact that there's one attack. There's multiple different attack vectors here. So we're looking at infrastructure, which are the blue lines. Web attacks are layer 7. You remember at the beginning we talked about layer 3, 4, and 7. So this is going to be the layer 7 attacks. And then we've got the DNS attacks, and then we've got the DNS reflection. So you can see that over a sort of, how many say this was? 68 days, multiple different attack vectors. So they're looking at attacking the infrastructure, they're looking at attacking the DNS structure, and they're looking at attacking the layer 7 web application structure. And we also tracked a lot of web application exploits as well on this. Because one of the main issues you tend to find with DDoS attacks is, what are they trying to do? They're trying to take down the routers, they're trying to take down the firewalls, they're trying to take down your IPSs. So when you've taken down all that, you then have to turn it all back on again. And this is when the holes appear. You only have to have a hole there for 2 minutes for to be able to get a rat into your network and be able to act as a Trojan. And that was the classic example of what happened with Sony a few years ago, when they said exactly what happened. You know, the Anonymous said they were going to attack Sony, and they told everybody, because Anonymous are great at self-promotion, they told everybody they're going to attack Sony. The other bad guys also knew they were going to attack Sony. So when Sony went down, the guys who really wanted to do damage went in and stole all the data. Anonymous had nothing to do with it, but the other guys could see that they'd taken them down. They could see that then they were more and more vulnerable. So this has 321 gigabit per second attack, so a pretty huge volumetric attack. And what was the other size of it? 270 million packets per second and 85 billion DNS requests. So I'm not quite sure what you use for your DNS servers at the moment, but just trying to think about that we're doing 85 billion DNS requests every week. So this one is another example, again, trying to make you think about protecting the DNS. This is not really something you want to rely on doing either in-house or doing it with a small organization. You want to think about how can you distribute this? How can you make this available? Because the DNS is a very, very key asset. In this particular attack, when this customer normally saw 30 million DNS hits per week, they saw 19.1 billion requests. That's massive. So it's going to take down your entire DNS infrastructure. Without DNS, you can't do anything. You are not talking to anybody. You're not sending emails. You're not doing your web. Nobody's going to come into you. Everything's down. Does anybody do any security with their DNS? Does anybody know what any of these mean? So simple checks and balances. If you're using a cloud-based DNS provider as opposed to having it on your own server, have you got things like two-factor authentication on the web page, on the control page, to actually look after your domain, your .tr domain? Yeah, there's bound to be a web page that can control that. Yeah, have you got two-factor authentication on that, so not anybody can just have a guess and try and hack that login, which has happened before. Do you have any locks on here? So if somebody wants to try and make an edit to make a server update, what are the checks and balances on there? Is there anything that can do to verify that happens? Because otherwise, this is what happened here. This was the Syrian Electronic Army. They basically hacked the US DoD. All they did is they went on to the DNS and changed the DNS name to point to their website. That easy. So you need to have something that's locked down. You need to have something that's secure. Now, we're all security professionals in here, and I really like this cartoon by XKCD. It's a cartoon online. And I think as security professionals, this highlights a very important point. We know what happens when somebody's being DDoSed. So if I see that one of your sites is being taken down, I know that it's your website that's down. Nothing bad's probably going to be happening. The public doesn't know that. If you're a bank and your bank's been DDoS and your bank's gone offline, the public thinks they've been hacked. The public thinks somebody's nicking their money. So the public perception of the brand is very important. This is why, to speak from our perspective as security professionals, we know that there probably hasn't been anything bad to it, but from the public's perspective, the brand tarnishing, the brand reputation can be affected. So I'm going to quickly talk about some web application attacks in the next couple of minutes. So Q2 2015, within Akamai, we saw SQL injection attacks. These have been around for years now. Can't believe that people are still being caught out by SQL injection attacks. It should be like 101 on a web app developer's guide of how to protect your application. Still being used. This is the thing where you need to have an effective firewall that is designed to be able to check out all of these common things. How can we protect your application against SQL injection attacks? Local file inclusions. Again, this is another very common attack vector we saw in Q1 this year. And this is just basic so we can go through. It's very easy to do some maybe directory traversal to be able to dump down the password file from all the users who use that website. Pretty easy to do. So if we start looking at the attacks that we're seeing, we pointed out that 3 out of 4 companies, and there's probably about sort of 60 people in this room, so yeah, 40 people, or the companies you belong to, probably will be targeted by web application exploits. And if we be able to put some scanners or IPS or IDS, you probably know that already. SQL injection, again, from the previous slide, it's in 1 in every 3 attacks. Still a massive attack vector. And it still isn't being effectively programmed out as part of the development. We did a survey, so this is what we call Akamai CSI. Akamai as a company delivers 1/3 of the internet on a daily basis, so we get lots of really good information. And every now and then we play around with it. And we looked at 2,000 customers over a week to try and figure out what all the SQL attacks that we were seeing were doing. The majority of them were sort of SQL injection probing to see what they could get out of it. So this is like, well, what can I put into the attack? What can I put into that stream? So if you've ever done an e-commerce site or something like that, what they want to try and do is that you can manipulate the string so that it'll populate your basket with a $0 value on it. And if you actually manipulate the string, you actually work out what a $0 value, you can manipulate it so you'll actually have a $0 value in your checkout basket for 10 items. Or what they'll do is they'll try and put hold orders on 20, 40, 60 different items to try and make your stock values go to 0. All these things are very possible with SQL injection attacks. Credential theft. Really important thing at the moment. There's been lots of... anybody heard of Ashley Madison? Yeah. Anybody in security's heard of it? Credential theft. It's easy, just easy to get hold of this sort of stuff. So these things where if you're holding information about people, whether it's personal identifiable information, PII data, you have to be really sure that you put all the protections in place to ensure that this sort of data cannot be exploited. You can't go and get the password dump. You can't go and do a SQL injection attack or cross-site scripting attack to try and get this information back. So as mentioned before, Akamai sees about 30% of the internet due to the fact that we deliver so much on behalf of so many of the large organizations. So generally, you'll be using Akamai today. If you've been on the internet and browsing social media, or you've been buying an airline ticket, or looking at any sort of media sites, you've probably been using Akamai underneath the hood. Because we see all this traffic, it gives a lot of intelligence that we're able to use. Now, if you were in Jonathan Martin's session earlier on this afternoon, you'll notice that he was talking about how you manipulate data. Data is very easy to be created. To make it actionable is very difficult. So what we've been doing is we've been working together to try and create this into something that we can actually work with and process that and give it to you and utilize it within ourselves to make it more effective. And this is a quick example. So this is an example of an RFI attack against a WordPress application. When we actually went through and ran it through all the data we see, we actually figured out that this was not only one attack, that the attacker had launched 34 different sites, the same attack, 24,500 attacks in total, with a 272 strong botnet, total of 1.3 million attacks. And we were able to bring in all these attacks together and go back to our user base and sort of say, look, these are the attacks that are going on. You need to be able to think about how you're going to maintain your attack vectors. How are you going to be able to protect that? What are you going to put in place to help them? We were talking about, again, the intelligence thing. This is a thing we did for, and this is, again, in our Q2 attack report. You can download it from the website. We went in and did an analysis of WordPress. WordPress as a whole is a pretty stable application. It's pretty reliable. And the first generation of the third-party plugins are pretty good. Where it all starts to fall apart is in the updates to the third-party plugins for WordPress. That's when the hackers tend to put in their malicious payloads. And these are the ones that we found, just by going through a little bit of Q&A with the data that we see. So we actually went back to all the vendors and said, look, we found this exploit, we found this exploit, we found this exploit. And this allowed us to get that information back. So this is all in our Q2 report. Tool, Onion Router, I'm sure you've all heard of this. We also did an analysis as well to find out should you block traffic coming from Tor. And we found out that for every single request coming from a Tor node, 1 in 380 was bad, compared to 1 in 11,500. So the ratio is pretty strong there. The majority of traffic coming from the Tor nodes was malicious. And I'm just going to spend 1 minute on bots before I get kicked off the stage. Bots is the big security issue at the moment. And I want to try and finish up on this one. Bots are very important because you don't know what is a good bot and what is a bad bot. It's very difficult for us as security professionals using automated tools to try and figure out what they are. And the way we have to manage that, because you want to make sure your Google bots come through, you want to make sure your Bing and your Baidu bots come through, because you want that information. You want to be up there on the search engine optimization. So what you want to be able to do is be able to identify the IPs that these bots are coming from and be able to classify them. Are they good and are they bad? And the Akamai process, because we see all the IPs, we are able then to manipulate that and give each of these IPs coming into us a score, good, bad, or in between. And we'll score them on a sliding scale. And by doing that, that allows us to be able to say, we can let these bots in, or we can reject them. Or we can do other stuff as well. We can do bot management, which is basically putting them into holding zones and doing other clever stuff. I'm going to quickly go through these, but this gives you an idea of the intelligence. 3.37 billion bots. 42% of them are malicious. This is the intelligence that we can put out. All of this is downloadable from our website. It's all publicly available. And this comes back to our triangle. Fast DNS to protect your DNS servers. The intelligent cloud to protect your web applications. And the prolexic routed service to protect your infrastructure. Goes back to the triangle we saw at the very beginning. 3 solutions to protect 3 key web infrastructure areas. Thank you.